All right, buckle up for a deep dive, everyone.
Hmm.
We're headed into some seriously dark territory today.
Oh, yeah, definitely dark.
We're going to be exploring the unsettling world of cults,
Cults are always unsettling.
specifically the Anthill Kids, led by Rock Theriault.
Rock Theriault.
And listener discretion is advised because, let's just say this story involves some graphic content. Things get really rough. Really rough.
It's a rough one. A stark example, really, of how power dynamics, can just unfold within a cult.
Yeah,
And this charismatic leader, how they can manipulate vulnerable individuals. It's really something.
definitely. And our source material for this deep dive is a YouTube video
Okay.
titled, "He Punched Your Uterus Back In Worst Cult Ever, Anthill Kids."
Wow.
It's from the channel, MVU. So, before we get into the truly horrifying details,
Right.
maybe we should start by understanding who Rock Theriault was
Yeah, good idea.
and how he came to lead this group.
Like, how did he even get here?
Exactly. So, maybe you can walk us through his early life. Did his early life offer any clues about where he was headed?
Well, I mean, he was considered intelligent, but he only received a limited education.
How really?
Yeah, he actually dropped out of school after 7th grade.
Wow.
But here's the interesting thing. He claimed to have an abusive childhood.
Yeah.
But these claims were actually refuted by his family and neighbors.
Interesting. So right off the bat, we're seeing this pattern of deception, like
Yeah.
maybe creating a narrative that doesn't necessarily align with reality.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that tendency to manipulate the narrative, it really became a key feature of his leadership style.
Interesting.
Now, add to that this early fascination with religion,
Religion.
particularly the Bible. I mean, you can start to see how those elements would play a role later on in his ability to control his followers.
It's fascinating how these seemingly ordinary interests can be twisted and used for such, sinister purposes.
sure.
So how did Theriault go from this kind of troubled background to attracting a following?
Well, in the 1970s, he and a group of followers started what seemed like a pretty harmless, health-focused clinic.
A clinic.
Yeah, they were promoting like organic food and abstinence from smoking and drinking, pretty standard stuff.
Appealing to people's desire for a healthier lifestyle.
Exactly, yeah. But it's crazy, this seemingly innocuous clinic, it morphed into this terrifying cult.
So what was the catalyst for that shift? How did that even happen?
Well, Theriault, he was a master manipulator. I mean, he was really good at it.
Okay.
He used his charisma along with like these really intense stares and meaningless jargon to impress and control his followers.
Wow. So he was that convincing.
Oh, he was convincing, very convincing. People sold their assets, even relinquished custody of their children to invest in the clinic.
Wow. Convincing someone to give up their own child. That's a pretty clear indicator of his persuasive power.
It really is. And it's disturbing to think about the level of trust and vulnerability that he exploited.
Definitely.
And all that manipulation, it just intensified when he started incorporating his own twisted interpretations of religion.
Oh, so he went from promoting healthy living to claiming some kind of divine authority.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's a pretty classic cult leader move.
Yeah, it's a common tactic. So he's hiking on a mountain one day, and he claims to have had this vision. He sees this white light. He hears God's voice, and he declares that that very spot is holy, and he starts referring to himself as God's messenger.
Wow. So that really solidified his control over the group.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big claim.
It's amazing how people can be so swayed by these claims of divine revelation.
It is.
So did he use this newfound authority to justify any specific actions or changes within the group?
Oh, he certainly did. He convinced his followers that the world was ending in 1979.
The world was ending.
Yeah, an apocalyptic prophecy. Like a prediction of a catastrophic event. It'll bring about widespread destruction and change. It's actually a pretty common theme in a lot of cults. It's often used to instill fear and urgency, which makes the followers more compliant.
Yeah, I can see how that would work.
So to prepare for this supposed apocalypse, Theriault urged his followers to relocate.
Relocate.
Yeah, to a secluded mountain settlement to get away from the coming end of the world.
And that's where the name Anthill Kids comes from, right?
That's right.
It's a pretty strange name for a group that started out focused on healthy living.
Yeah, it is. It's Pretty revealing, though, the name.
Oh,
Theriault mockingly called them the Anthill Kids because of their relentless work building the settlement.
so it's kind of a telling sign of how he viewed his followers.
Yeah. Not as equals, not as
Just
collaborators.
expendable laborers.
Yeah, under his control. And sadly, any pretense of promoting a healthy lifestyle, that was completely abandoned at this point. Theriault, he's openly engaging in smoking, drinking, and he even starts exploiting the female members of the cult.
Wow. So it seems like the isolation of the mountain settlement really allowed him to exert even more control
Yeah.
and escalate the abuse.
Oh, definitely, for sure. And it's important to remember that a lot of what we know about this cult, it comes from the children who were eventually rescued
Okay.
and placed in foster care. They've shared some truly harrowing accounts of the abuse they endured.
Those testimonies are so valuable in understanding the horrors that took place within the Anthill Kids. It's like firsthand accounts.
Exactly. Of the physical and psychological torment. It's really rough.
So the abuse went beyond just controlling their diets and relationships.
Mhm.
What specific forms did it take?
Well, the punishments became increasingly brutal and sadistic.
I can't even imagine.
We're talking broken bones, burns, forced shootings, amputation.
Amputations.
One particularly disturbing incident involved a pregnant woman who was punished for eating too many pancakes.
Too many pancakes.
That's right.
It's hard to believe.
Theriault had her ribs broken and then forced her husband to cut off one of her fingers.
Oh my gosh. It's hard to even fathom that level of cruelty. Did anyone ever question his authority?
I mean, there were attempts to escape, but Theriault was really good at manipulating his followers into returning.
So how did he do that?
He would claim to have changed or promise them a better future if they came back.
Oh, so it's like a classic cycle of abuse.
Yeah, the abuser pretends to change, the victim returns hoping for the best, and then the cycle repeats, usually with even greater violence.
It speaks volumes about Theriault's cunning and the psychological hold he had over his followers.
Definitely. And it's how cults operate, sadly.
So how did he maintain that level of power? I mean, beyond the violence.
Well, he was constantly reinforcing his authority through intimidation and these really bizarre rituals. Like, picture this. He would be shouting at the sky, claiming he was communicating with God, receiving instructions on how to punish the group.
So he essentially weaponized their belief in God.
Exactly. He convinced them that any suffering they endured was part of God's plan, and he was just carrying out divine will.
And all of this was happening during a time when public awareness of cults wasn't as widespread as it is today,
Right.
especially after the Jonestown Massacre. People were still grappling with the reality of how dangerous these groups could be. So Theriault really exploited this lack of awareness. He operated with impunity for a tragically long time.
Yeah, he did.
It's striking how this case really echoes other cult tragedies, like Jonestown. They both involve these charismatic leaders who isolate their followers and enforce their will through fear and manipulation.
It really makes you wonder, how can seemingly ordinary people become so consumed by a cult leader's ideology?
It's a crucial question, and it really highlights the need to understand the psychological dynamics that are at play in these situations. It's not just about, like, blind faith or stupidity. There are specific tactics and vulnerabilities that cult leaders exploit.
That's very true.
But before we dive deeper into that, maybe we should shift our focus to the specific events that ultimately led to Theriault's downfall. Because as horrific as his reign of terror was, thankfully it didn't last forever.
You're right.
So there was a turning point, a moment where the facade finally started to crumble, right?
There were actually several turning points,
Okay.
but one of the most significant involved the death of a 2-year-old boy named Samuel.
Samuel.
Now, initially, the death was attributed to a punch, delivered by a follower named Guy. But as we'll see, the truth was far more disturbing.
That detail from the video about the circumstances surrounding Samuel's death was just truly sickening. And I think before we get into that, I think it's worth exploring the psychological hold that Theriault had over his followers in a little more detail to really try to understand how this could have happened.
Yeah, that's a good idea. To understand how someone like Theriault could maintain such control, we really need to understand those dynamics of manipulation and coercion. And one of his most effective tools was that constant threat of punishment.
Right. And it wasn't just the physical punishment that kept people in line.
No.
It was the relationships, the access to money, the connection to the outside world. Like, he created this environment where even thinking about dissent was terrifying.
Absolutely. He systematically stripped away their individuality and their autonomy, leaving them completely dependent on him for their sense of safety and belonging.
It's textbook cult behavior.
It's
Sad.
book.
It's also a sobering reminder that these tactics can be used in much more subtle ways,
Hmm.
in everyday life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So recognizing those patterns of manipulation can help us protect ourselves and others.
Knowledge is power.
Well said. We still have a lot to uncover in this deep dive,
We do.
including the events leading to Theriault's arrest
Ah.
and the aftermath for his followers. But I think this is a good point to pause
Yeah,
and let our listeners absorb all of this disturbing information.
good idea. It's a lot to take in. Welcome back. We left off talking about the death of young Samuel. Really, it was a turning point in this whole Anthill Kid saga.
Yeah, and after Samuel's death, Guy, the follower initially blamed, faced a horrific punishment.
Yeah.
It's almost unimaginable what he went through.
It really is. Theriault, in this truly barbaric display, he ordered Guy's castration. I mean, imagine this scene. Other cult members under Theriault's direction, they tie Guy down, and then, well, they slowly sliced off his testicles. It's hard to even talk about.
It makes you wonder, how could anyone not only conceive of such a punishment, but also participate in carrying it out? How did the other cult members reconcile that kind of brutality with, their belief in Theriault as this divine messenger?
It's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? The level of indoctrination and fear must have been immense. For them to not only tolerate it, but actually participate in such an act, it really speaks to the insidious nature of cults and the power they have to just warp an individual's sense of morality.
Absolutely. And Guy's story is so crucial because it was his escape and testimony that would eventually help bring Theriault down. But it wasn't an immediate downfall, was it?
No, not at all. The police, they were already aware of Theriault and his group, but they lacked, the concrete evidence needed for an arrest. Remember, Theriault was very skilled at presenting this charming facade to the outside world. He even he used radio broadcasts to spread his message and defend his community, which further manipulated public perception.
It's incredible how he managed to evade justice for so long, using these very tools of communication that are meant to connect people, to further isolate and control his followers.
Yeah, his tactics were chillingly effective. However, things really escalated when Theriault went on the radio with another apocalyptic prediction.
Another one?
Oh, yeah, claiming the world was about to end.
Oh, wow.
So this combined with Guy's testimony and just the growing concerns about the group's activities finally pushed the police to act.
So they finally raided the compound.
Yes, arrested Theriault and several followers for Samuel's death. And Theriault and his wife, Giselle, also faced charges related to Guy's castration.
What was the outcome of the trial? Did justice finally prevail?
Well, Theriault was initially sentenced to 2 years in prison.
2 years.
Which might seem shockingly lenient.
Yeah, for the crimes that we've been discussing.
Considering the gravity of his crimes, however, this was just the beginning of his legal troubles.
Okay, so it sounds like his time in prison didn't exactly prompt a change of heart. Did any of his followers, kind of break free from his influence during this time?
Well, while some members did leave the cult, many remained fiercely loyal, clinging to their belief in Theriault. And upon his release in 1984, he reasserted control, and they relocated near Burnt River, opening a bakery as a front for their activities.
A bakery. It seems almost comical considering the darkness that surrounded this group. What was he baking? Sourdough bread of despair. It's just a jarring contrast.
It really is. But, it highlights his skill at blending in and projecting this image of normalcy. He was a master of deception, always playing a role to suit his needs.
So did his behavior change after his release? Did he become less violent?
Sadly, no. The punishments, if anything, became even more brutal and bizarre. It's as if he needed to reassert his dominance and instill even greater fear in his followers.
Are there any specific incidents from this period that really stand out?
Oh, many, unfortunately. One disturbing example involved his own wife, Giselle.
His wife?
He became enraged over poor bakery sales, and in a fit of rage, he ripped out one of her teeth with pliers.
Oh my gosh, that's monstrous. What kind of a twisted mind inflicts that kind of pain on someone, let alone their own spouse.
It's a chilling reminder that the people closest to a cult leader are often subjected to the worst abuse. They become symbols of power, to be manipulated and controlled as a way of demonstrating the leader's absolute authority.
It's tragic. And then the abuse extended beyond Giselle, didn't it?
Absolutely. The psychological manipulation, the physical brutality, it all continued. He would inject followers with unknown substances, breaking the needles off inside their bodies. Like he saw them as subjects in some twisted experiment.
That image is just horrifying. It's like he was playing doctor, but with a complete lack of medical knowledge or compassion.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. Theriault did in fact claim to be a doctor. He was performing these crude surgeries on his followers with no medical training whatsoever. And that brings us back to Gabrielle, the woman whose hand he had nailed to a table.
Oh, that incident it's difficult to even comprehend the level of cruelty involved. What happened to her after that?
Well, Gabrielle had previously escaped, but she was lured back, and this time Theriault, in a rage, he drove a knife through her hand, pinning it to a table, and he left her there, bleeding, for 45 minutes while he casually drank beer.
It sounds almost too horrific to be real. Did she ever manage to break free from his control?
Well, what's remarkable about Gabrielle's story is that, as she later recounted, during this ordeal, she had this vision of God, and she realized that Theriault wasn't a divine messenger, but a devil. Even amidst this unimaginable suffering, she managed to find this glimmer of clarity. It's really a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
Wow. That moment of clarity must have been like a lifeline in a sea of darkness.
You're right. But sadly, even after this experience, Gabrielle wasn't able to immediately break free. She was taken to a hospital, but she lied to protect Theriault, still fearing his retribution. It's heartbreaking, but it's a common pattern we see with victims of abuse.
It's that insidious nature of cults, that fear becomes so ingrained that even when they're presented with an opportunity to escape, victims often feel paralyzed.
Exactly. And unfortunately, the brutality didn't end with Gabrielle. Yeah. Theriault continued this pattern of bizarre and cruel punishments. There's one incident involving a follower named Claude. Theriault tied this tight elastic band around Claude's genitals, causing severe swelling, and then he proceeded to cut off the affected flesh and cauterize the wound with a searing hot iron rod.
With each detail we uncover, it becomes harder and harder to reconcile with the fact that these events actually happen. It's like something out of a horror movie, but the reality is so much more disturbing.
And tragically, the worst was yet to come. This period culminated in the death of his wife, Solange Boillard.
Her death was particularly gruesome, even for Theriault. It's like his brutality was escalating to new heights.
It really was. Solange had been complaining of stomach pain, and instead of seeking proper medical attention, Theriault decided to perform an enema, but it was anything but a standard medical procedure.
From what I recall, he essentially tortured her.
You're right. He inserted a tube into her rectum and punched her repeatedly in the stomach. Then he forced other cult members to blow air into the tube and suck it back out. But this horrifying ordeal wasn't enough for him. He grabbed a knife and cut a 5-inch deep gash in her side.
Oh my gosh. It's hard to even listen to this. It just defies any sense of logic or compassion. What happened next?
Well, Theriault plunged his hand into the wound and pulled out a portion of her intestines. Other members tried to stitch up the wound, but it was too late. Solange bled to death.
I'm speechless. It's beyond depraved.
And it gets even more disturbing. After Solange's death, Theriault, in this twisted display of grief and delusion, he exhumed her body, drilled a hole into her skull, and engaged in sexual acts with it.
Oh, I don't even know what to say. It's beyond any realm of human decency. What happened to the other cult members after Solange's death? Did anyone finally see Theriault for the monster he was?
They were understandably terrified. They would hide in the woods whenever Theriault was drinking, fearing his drunken rages. Some did manage to escape during this period, but many remained trapped, their minds warped by years of abuse and manipulation.
It's hard to fathom how anyone could still follow him after all that had happened.
It's a testament to the power of fear and indoctrination, but thankfully this reign of terror was about to end. Gabrielle, the woman who had her hand nailed to the table, she would play a pivotal role in Theriault's downfall.
Really? How so? Did she manage to escape again?
After yet another a horrifying incident of mutilation at the hands of Theriault, Gabrielle finally found the courage to escape for good. She stumbled out of the woods and into a women's shelter, her body bearing the scars of this unimaginable abuse.
It's incredible that she even survived. Her resilience is truly remarkable.
Her survival is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And thankfully, this time, she was ready to tell the truth. When the police arrived, she recounted the years of horror that she and the others had endured.
So this was the moment the police had been waiting for.
Exactly. They finally had the evidence they needed to bring Theriault to justice. They launched a manhunt, and after 6 weeks, he was finally apprehended.
And what happened to him? Did he face the full weight of the law for his crimes?
Theriault was charged with a slew of offenses, including second-degree murder of Solange. He eventually admitted to his crimes and was sentenced to life in prison.
It's a small comfort knowing that he was finally held accountable for his actions.
It is, but sadly, his story doesn't end there. Even from behind bars, he continued to exert a disturbing influence over some of his former followers. Several women remained devoted to him, visiting him regularly in prison. It's a chilling reminder of the enduring power of cult leaders, even when their crimes are exposed.
It's a tragic end to a truly horrifying story.
It really is. The Anthill Kids case is a dark chapter in human history, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, manipulation, and blind faith.
You know, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, and it's been an intense and disturbing journey. But I think it's important to shine a light on these dark corners of human behavior so we can learn from them.
I agree. By confronting these difficult realities, we can become more aware of the warning signs, protect ourselves and others, and hopefully prevent such atrocities from happening again.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to the final part of this deep dive, I want to pause and reflect on something you mentioned earlier. You said that Theriault was a brilliant and intelligent man. It's hard to reconcile that description with someone capable of such monstrous acts.
It is a difficult concept to grasp, isn't it? But intelligence and morality aren't always aligned. Theriault was undoubtedly intelligent. I mean, in the sense that he was highly manipulative and cunning. He understood human psychology and how to exploit people's vulnerabilities. But he lacked empathy and a moral compass, which allowed him to justify his horrific actions.
So it's a chilling reminder that intelligence can be used for both good and evil.
Precisely. It really underscores the importance of critical thinking and questioning authority. Regardless of how charismatic or intelligent someone may seem, blindly following anyone can have disastrous consequences.
Well, I think that's a powerful and crucial point to consider as we move into the final part of our discussion. This deep dive into the Anthill Kids cult has been a harrowing journey, but it's a story that needs to be told. We must learn from these tragedies and work to prevent them from happening again.
I agree. By understanding the dangers of cults, the psychology of manipulation, and the importance of critical thinking, we can create a safer and more informed world.
Well said. Now let's move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the aftermath of the Anthill Kids and the long road to healing for those who survived this horrific ordeal.
Welcome back to our deep dive into this disturbing world of the Anthill Kids. We've been, exploring the horrific crimes of Rock Theriault. But now that he's behind bars, I'm curious, what happened next? It's hard to imagine, even after his conviction, some of his followers remained devoted.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon that's fascinating and tragic. Even after Theriault's arrest and imprisonment, several women from the cult continued to visit him in prison.
It speaks volumes, really, about the psychological hold that he had over them, even when faced with, undeniable evidences of his brutality.
It really makes you question how such a warped belief system could persist, even after, the truth was revealed. Did Theriault ever express remorse for his actions while in prison?
There's no indication that he ever truly grasped the extent of his crimes or the suffering he inflicted.
It's like he just didn't get it.
It seemed like he maintained this sense of self-righteousness, viewing himself as a victim of circumstance rather than the perpetrator of these horrific acts.
It sounds like he was a master manipulator to the very end.
Oh, he was, to the very end.
But for Theriault, even prison couldn't offer true escape from the consequences of his actions, right?
You're right. In 2011, Theriault was murdered in his prison cell by a fellow inmate, Matthew MacDonald.
Oh, wow.
MacDonald apparently had become increasingly frustrated with Theriault's behavior and just decided to take matters into his own hands.
So it's like a grim end to a life defined by by violence and control. It's almost as if the cycle of violence that he perpetuated came full circle and ultimately consumed him.
Yeah, full circle.
But what about the survivors? What became of the Anthill Kids members after the cult was dismantled?
Their stories, they're really complex and varied. Some were able to rebuild their lives and find healing, while others continued to struggle with the profound trauma they endured. And it's important to remember that the psychological scars of cult membership, they can run deep, impact every aspect of a person's life.
It must have been incredibly difficult to reintegrate into society. After being so isolated, so controlled, they essentially had to rebuild their entire worldview from scratch.
You're right. They not only had to confront the physical and emotional abuse that they suffered, but also deconstruct the distorted belief system that had, defined their lives for so long. It's really a testament to their resilience that any of them were able to recover and create this new sense of normalcy.
Their stories really underscore the long-lasting impact of cults, the damage that extends, far beyond just the immediate acts of violence. It's not just about escaping physical confinement, but escaping the mental and emotional prison that a cult leader creates.
Exactly. It highlights why understanding the dynamics of cults and the tactics they use is so crucial. We need to be able to recognize the warning signs,
Yeah.
protect ourselves and others from falling prey to such manipulation.
Well said. Throughout this whole deep dive, we've discussed the shocking brutality of Rook Theriault's actions. But I'm left with this lingering question. How did these seemingly ordinary individuals become so completely ensnared in his web of manipulation? What vulnerabilities did he exploit?
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? While every individual story is unique, there are some common threads that weave through, a lot of these cult narratives. Often people are drawn to cults during times of vulnerability, transition, seeking a sense of belonging, purpose, or answers to life's big questions.
So someone like Theriault, with his charisma and claims of divine authority, he could easily exploit those desires, right? Offering the sense of security and certainty in a world that often feels so chaotic and unpredictable.
Exactly. He presented himself as this savior, someone who had all the answers and could guide them to a better life. Of course, that promise was a lie, a facade, really, designed to lure them into his web of control.
And once they were isolated within the group, surrounded by others who, reinforced Theriault's ideology, it must have been incredibly difficult to break free from that mindset.
That's the power of groupthink
Hmm.
and indoctrination. The cult becomes their entire world, their only source of information and validation. Dissent is discouraged and critical thinking is suppressed, making it nearly impossible to see the situation clearly.
It's a chilling reminder that cults can prey on anyone, regardless of their background or intelligence. The key is to cultivate critical thinking skills and a healthy skepticism, especially when confronted with claims of absolute authority or promises of easy answers.
You're right. We have to learn to question, to seek out diverse perspectives, and to trust our own instincts. It's about empowering ourselves to recognize manipulation and resist the allure of those who seek to control us.
I think that's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. This deep dive into the Anthill Kids has been, a harrowing journey, a stark reminder of the dark side of human nature. But within these stories of manipulation and tragedy, there's also a glimmer of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
I agree. And while it's essential to acknowledge the devastating impact of cults, it's equally important to remember that healing and recovery are possible. For those who've been affected by cults, there are resources available and there is hope for a brighter future.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic, to learn more about the psychology of cults, the dynamics of manipulation, and the importance of critical thinking. By understanding these complex issues, we can all contribute to creating a safer and more informed world.